Green, and I shall be chairing this evening's really important and, of course, highly timely meeting. I welcome you all, and we have a brilliant range of speakers this evening who all have an incredible range of experience of both Israel, but more importantly of Palestine. And we are meeting at a time of unprecedented and dreadful violence against the Palestinian people. I hope we will all learn something about what it is that we might be able to do in helping our friends and comrades in Palestine at this very difficult time. We have a number of speakers, so I'm going to make this reminder at the beginning, and I shall after every speaker, that we've set aside 10 minutes for each speaker so as to allow a decent time for a presentation, but also to ensure that we have time for questions at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Ofer Cassif, who is a member of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, of course. Dr. Ofer Cassif is an Israeli politician who has been a member of the Knesset representing HADASH, the Democratic Front for Peace and Equality, since 2019. He studied politics and philosophy at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where he began his political career as a parliamentary aide to Maya Wilna and participated in anti-occupation activism, including, we regret to say, 4 terms in military prison for refusing to serve in the occupied Palestinian territories. He gained his PhD in political philosophy at the London School of Economics and was then at Columbia University in New York. Before he was elected to the Knesset, Dr. Cassif lectured in political science at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, at Tel Aviv Yafo College and Sapir Academic College. On October 2023, so this is really quite up to date, during an interview with Al Jazeera, he called the Israeli government fascist and accused it of carrying out pogroms and ethnic cleansing against the Palestinian population. He was subsequently suspended for these comments and others by the ethics panel of the Knesset for 45 days, a decision which Dr. Cassif characterized as another nail in the coffin of freedom of political expression. You can see he is ideally placed to open our meeting this evening with his remarks. Dr. Cassif, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure and honor to speak with you. And of course, later on to answer whatever questions or remarks you have. As everybody knows, Israel has been carrying out for more than 50 years a vicious occupation of the Palestinian territories that Israel occupied in June 1967. That is to say, Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank. In the last few years, the occupation grew stronger, deeper, wider. It became much more vicious and deadly, especially in the last year or even before, under the so-called government of change. That is the government that was before the current one. But especially in the last year, under the fascist government that unfortunately exists now with creatures like Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, and other thugs. So especially under this government, the settlers, and especially those who live in outposts, so to speak, which are illegal even according to the Israeli law. Obviously, we all know that all settlements are illegal according to the international law. But even according to the Israeli law, the so-called outposts are illegal. They are still there because there are 2 systems of law, to say the least. And that's one of the definitions of apartheid, of course, which also exists there. And so they actually go on and pogrom, and they burn fields, cut trees, sometimes burn houses on their residence, you know. And they attack viciously on a daily basis I may say that under this government, especially since the 7th of October, it's not even a daily basis, it's on an hourly basis that they attack Palestinians, innocent civilians, people who work, for instance, go to harvest their trees, they're going to harvest their fields, and they're going to harvest their olives mainly. So they attack them. They also attack, especially in the last few months, because they are encouraged to do so by the government, and everything is under the auspices, of course, of the military, the occupation forces. They also attack peace and anti-occupation activists, including Israelis. Many of them were hospitalized for being beaten maliciously by settlers. Of course, the system doesn't do anything about it, so-called system or establishment. Just a second, sorry, someone called me. So about 1 year ago, a friend of mine who is very activist, a 70-year-old woman, a very dear activist against the occupation, was viciously beaten by settlers. They broke their ribs and they harmed her skull. Up till now, no one was investigated, let alone charged or prosecuted. So that's what's going on. Now, having said that, and of course, the ongoing siege on Gaza, which turned Gaza into a ghetto, into a huge prison, I have to say something very important to make things very accurate. In about 20 years ago, when the so-called disengagement plan was brought to the Knesset for a vote, the right wing actually voted for it, especially the Likud, including Netanyahu. 4 times he voted for the disengagement. Why? Because as Sharon was then the prime minister, and he was the one who actually proposed the disengagement plan, they said that in that way, it is possible to prevent the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. And that's one of the reasons that actually the left wing, our representatives in the parliament, didn't vote for the disengagement plan. They abstained. By the way, I wrote an article then in 2004, and I said that we actually had to vote against. Why? Because we anticipated that the disengagement plan was intended to turn Gaza into a huge prison. And it was very obvious not only that the Palestinians, first and foremost, were going to pay the price in starvation, dehydration, lack of medicine, electricity, everything that we know, before Hamas took control over in their coup in the Gaza Strip. But we also anticipated that the residents of the south of Israel were going to pay the price, because no one in a ghetto like that could have sat quietly without doing anything. That's not to justify harming civilians. We are against it. But we anticipated. That's the reason we didn't vote for the disengagement. Now, all the things I said, which is only the tip of the iceberg in describing the crimes of the ongoing occupation and siege, nothing can justify the massacre that Hamas committed on 7th of October. And it's very, very important for me to say that very clearly, very bluntly, and because I'm afraid that some people don't understand that. What Hamas did on the 7th of October is a crime against humanity. Butchering innocent civilians, including kids, babies, women, the elderly. This is something we shall never accept. This is anti-human. So nothing justifies it, not even the crimes of the occupation. But having said that, nothing can justify the massacre that goes on in Gaza. Not even the massacre and the crimes committed by Hamas. So you cannot say, like the government of Israel says, that nothing justifies the crimes that Hamas committed on 7th of October, and in that sense, I agree with them, but at the same time justifying the crimes, the massacre that the government of Israel has been carrying out for 2 months now. Now everybody knows what's going on in Gaza. It's not only the death toll, and I'm afraid that the death toll is much higher than we know because many people are still missing. I'm afraid that that at the moment there are about 30,000 victims. And of course, as the massacre, as the assault on Gaza goes on, the death toll is going to be much higher. When we talk about the injured, about the destruction, the total destruction, targeting especially civilians, especially civic buildings, etc. This is something that no one can tolerate. Unfortunately, the international community, the vast majority of or not the vast majority, but too many of the leaders in the world, especially the United States and the EU, don't do anything to prevent this carnage. We in HADASH oppose, and this in our demonstrations, I shall say something about it in a minute. Our demonstration is calling for ceasefire, calling for an immediate release of the hostages. The civilian hostages in the hands of Hamas, everybody is suffering from torture, starvation, etc. We know that. But especially we are talking about civilians who were criminally kidnapped. We are calling for immediate ceasefire to stop the carnage in Gaza, to release the hostages and exchange of prisoners, all for all. Palestinian prisoners for the Israeli ones. That's the only way. There's no military way. Not, first of all, because it's immoral to say the least, but it's also doesn't work either. So even if we talk, so to speak, practically, we must oppose the continuous assault on Gaza for moral reasons, first and foremost, but also for practical reasons. Now, because I don't have too much time, allow me to put everything in a context. As I said before, nothing can justify the massacre that Israel carries out against Gaza. Nothing can justify the massacre that Hamas committed against Israelis. The context we should refer to is, of course, not only the context of the occupation and the siege, which I already mentioned, and again, without giving any bit of justification for what Hamas did or for what Israel is doing. But we have also to look at another context. 6 years ago, in 2017, Bezalel Smotrich, who is even worse than a fascist, he reminds me to some extent Oswald Mosley, if you like. There are many resemblances between them. And let's say that he is definitely worse than Enoch Powell. And this Smotrich, who is now a minister, the finance minister, and also minister in the Ministry of Defense in Israel, published a plan, which you can Google and find because it was translated into English as well. It is called the Subjugation Plan. It boils down to 3 points. First, Israel must annex the Palestinian occupied territories. It was then mainly the West Bank. Now they are explicitly talking about the Gaza Strip as well, without granting basic rights to the Palestinians there. That means an official apartheid regime. There is already a practical apartheid regime and semi-official, but that plan wants to turn it into a full-fledged apartheid regime. The second point was that those Palestinians who are not ready to accept their lot as subjects are going to be deported from their homeland. And the third point, which was made implicitly but very clearly, is that those Palestinians who were going to resist the subjugation are going to be killed. What we are seeing now is the realization of this plan. The massacre that Hamas committed is used as an excuse by the Israeli government to pursue with this plan. The attack, the malicious, deadly massacre on Gaza is part of it. the ethnic cleansing that goes on in the West Bank, mainly by settlers, but under the auspices of the occupation forces and the encouragement of the government, is another part of it. And the fascization within the state of Israel proper is the third part of it. What do I mean by that? Israel, the government of Israel, since the 7th of October, actually has been realizing what it tried to realize by the so-called judicial reform that failed before, to turn Israel into a full-fledged fascist dictatorship. So at the moment, for instance, people who object the war and post or tweet anything on the social media against the war, calling for ceasefire. I'm not talking about supporting Hamas, perish the thought. I'm talking about objecting the war, calling for ceasefire, calling for a political solution. Those who do that, too many of them, mainly Arab citizens, but not only, some democratic Jews as well, are arrested, interrogated, charged as if they were supporting terrorism. They are suspended from universities and colleges as students. They are fired from their workplace only for posts that express empathy for the children of Gaza. And as like you said before, a friend of mine, Aida Tuma Sliman, she is as well a member of the Knesset with us, HADASH, and like myself, member of the Communist Party of Israel. She has been suspended for 2 months. I was suspended for 45 days, and now there are another calls to suspend me again, because we were talking against the massacre, nothing else.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up now, please, Dr.
Yeah, okay. So what I'm asking you to pay attention to is that what's going on now is a threefold attack against the Palestinians in Gaza, against the Palestinians in the West Bank, against the Palestinians within Israel proper, and the democratic forces, Jews and others as well. This is where we are standing. Our struggle is against the occupation, against war, for just peace between the two peoples, and for the benefit of the two peoples, and of course for real democracy, which is necessarily based on equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cassif, for that presentation. We're now going to move quickly to our second speaker. It's Ben Chacko, editor of the Morning Star. Ben was born in London, in Camden, but brought up in Cheltenham, where he was educated at Pate's Grammar School, but I won't hold that against him. And then at St John's College, Oxford, where he studied Mandarin. By the age of 15, a precocious young man, obviously, Ben was already attending meetings of the Young Communist League. He edited Challenge, the journal of the Young Communist League, and was a member of the Student Union Council at Oxford. Before joining the Morning Star, Ben lived and worked in China for a while. He was appointed editor of the Morning Star in 2015, the youngest editor since its founding editor, William Rust. He joined the paper as a sub-editor in 2010 and was subsequently deputy features editor, assistant editor, and deputy editor before being appointed acting editor in 2014. Ben, the floor is yours, but let me remind you about the 10 minutes, please. Off you go.
Thanks very much, Christine, and that's a very detailed introduction. Yeah, I was asked to speak a little bit about the media as a newspaper editor and the kind of motivations for Britain's support for what Israel's doing in Palestine, and the British media's approach to this war. Britain is one of Israel's closest international supporters and is an active facilitator of the illegal occupation of Palestine generally, and of the current murderous onslaught on Gaza specifically. The website Declassified and Campaign Against Arms Trade have both published reports on the hundreds of millions of pounds worth of weaponry which Britain sells to Israel, including parts for F-35 fighter jets, currently bombing hospitals, schools, and residential neighborhoods in Gaza. Britain also provides diplomatic cover for Israel. On Friday at the UN Security Council, Britain and the United States were the only countries not to support a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire, with Britain abstaining and the US vetoing the resolution. Britain's role is unpopular with the public here, and would be even more unpopular if it were more clearly understood. As we saw during Jeremy Corbyn's socialist leadership of the Labour Party from 2015 to 2020, mainstream media in Britain does not act to hold power to account, but rather as a propaganda arm of the British establishment. The media has, therefore, played a significant role in misrepresenting the character of the Palestinian question and the nature of the war, and in attempting to demonize Palestine solidarity protesters. But I think we should also note that it has had only limited success, as the enormous demonstrations in solidarity of the Palestinians shows. Two related factors motivate Britain's political and media elite in their determination to back Israel. The first is our so-called special relationship with the United States. Far more than any other NATO member, British foreign policy shadows US foreign policy across the board, whether that means joining in an illegal invasion of Iraq that other US allies opposed, or enthusiastically deploying warships to the Far East to take part in Washington's new Cold War on China, when powers like France and Germany adopt a much more cautious approach. Our vote at the Security Council on Friday reflects the fact that Britain will back a ceasefire when America backs a ceasefire, not before. The other factor is the exaggerated role support for Israel has come to play in our domestic politics as a reaction to the Corbyn movement in Labour. Corbyn's support for the Palestinian people came to stand in ruling class eyes for his wider opposition to British foreign policy, US world domination, and war. Although accusations that Corbyn's Labour had a problem with anti-Semitism were initially just one of a range of attacks on it, they became the dominant theme of media coverage of the party after 2017, and resulted in initially little known documents, like the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which dangerously conflates anti-Semitism with opposition to Israel, becoming very influential. The consequences have outlasted Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party, and are seen in the British government's ongoing efforts to ban the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement in solidarity with Palestine, and in periodic attempts to shut down Palestine solidarity activism in British universities. That is the context in which our rulers and their media mouthpieces reacted to the Hamas attack of October 7, and the bombardment and invasion of Gaza that followed, and the way in which mass Palestine protests have caused the biggest revolt in the Labour Party since Keir Starmer became leader, and reopened serious debate about Britain's foreign policy, which had been shut down arguably even before Corbyn ceased to leave the party, shows that they are right to worry about the impact of the Palestinian question on British politics. Misinformation about the war takes several forms. The initial response to the Hamas attack of October 7 was to portray it as a barbarous massacre motivated by Hamas's hate-fueled ideology. The Morning Star published an editorial placing the attack in context, explaining both the crippling 17-year siege of Gaza and the extreme rightward trajectory of Israeli politics, with 2023 already the deadliest year for Palestinians since 2006, even before the current attack on Gaza began. While these do not in any way justify Hamas's attacks on civilians, they do help to explain the situation. It is not widely reported in Britain that Israel's finance minister, whom Ofer was talking about before, Bezalel Smotrich, actually describes himself as a fascist, or that its national security minister has a conviction for incitement to terrorism, or that the last major peaceful protests in Gaza, the Great March of Return demos, were met with lethal violence by Israeli troops, with some Israeli citizens filmed picnicking on hillsides where they could observe the Palestinian demonstrators being gunned down. This is a context in which a violent explosion from within Palestine directed against Israel was likely, and also explains why the Gaza war is so dangerous, because the current Israeli leadership includes more open advocates of the ethnic cleansing of all Palestinian land than any of its predecessors. Yet you would not recognize this from the vast majority of British media reports, which either imply that this war began on October 7 with the Hamas attack, or portray the Israel-Palestine conflict as an intractable foreign dispute motivated by religious differences, rather than a struggle for Palestinian national rights, which are denied by Israel's occupation. The Israeli media, it should be said, does a better job than the British at explaining these factors, with Haaretz pointing to Netanyahu's policies as having provoked the October 7 attack, within 24 hours of it occurring. Another media tactic, which was analysed in detail by Morning Star columnist Solomon Hughes in last Friday's paper, was the use of exaggerated atrocity reports. Now, I completely agree with what Ofer was saying, that the massacres of October 7th were horrific enough as they were, but the reports that we saw in the British media still sought to exaggerate them. In this case, the notion that Hamas fighters had beheaded 40 babies was splashed all over supposedly respectable media outlets like The Times, but later proved to be untrue. As Solomon argued, such sensationalism is designed to drown out reasoned debate and foster support for unlimited retaliatory violence. As the horror of Israel's indiscriminate bombing of Gaza reached public consciousness, associating opposition to it with anti-Semitism came into play, led by the then Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who described demonstrations calling for a ceasefire as hate marches, and launched an open attack in the Times on the police for failing to ban them, which ultimately backfired and cost her her job. Braverman was the most extreme, but the casual association of any sympathy with Palestine with anti-Semitism is much more widespread. Reporting in the Telegraph and Times continues to push the hate marches narrative. A revealing report in the BBC, supposedly detailing Chinese diplomacy, claimed that China would struggle to be seen as a neutral peacemaker because it supports the establishment of a Palestinian state, something which supposedly Britain supports as well. And it even claimed without evidence that Chinese support for a Palestinian state had led to rising anti-Semitism in China. This propaganda is dangerous because it causes genuine fear among British Jews and poisons community relations. The campaign against anti-Semitism, which organised a large Jewish march a couple of weeks ago, claimed that ceasefire demonstrations were turning central London into a no-go zone for Jews, a complete lie, and many of the demos have included prominent Jewish contingents. As the political revolt against cross-party support for Israel has grown, other angles have been deployed to cover politicians' backs. In The Observer and Guardian, Andrew Rawnsley and Polly Toynbee reproached Labour members angry at Keir Starmer's position, saying it was not worth risking Labour unity over a foreign conflict, which Britain
I'm going to hurry you now, Ben. Okay.
Sorry, I've got just a couple of bars left.
Okay, good.
This argument fits into the long tradition of British right-wing social democracy, separating foreign and domestic politics, arguing that the left should only care about bread and butter issues. It acts as cover for the pursuit of aggressive foreign policy under both Labour and Conservative governments. And as we saw, Britain is playing a role in supporting Israel, which we do need to confront. So those, I would argue, have been the four main propaganda approaches of the British media in the war: removal of context, atrocity sensationalism, smearing peace campaigners as anti-Semites, and seeking to obscure Britain's role and responsibilities. I'm glad to say that I don't think these are working. Polls show huge support for a ceasefire among the public. We've seen a 10% rise in sales of the Morning Star in the last 2 months associated with our presence on the demos and our support for Palestine. And the continued size of those demos shows that people can see through the propaganda machine. So I think that should encourage us all to keep doing this, to keep speaking at meetings like this, and to keep marching. The British people do stand with Palestine, and we shouldn't allow that truth to be suppressed.
Ben, thank you very much for that very clear and interesting analysis. I'm now going to move us quickly to our third speaker. It's my very great pleasure to introduce Louise Regan, who might be described as a senior trade unionist. She's the ex-president of the NEU, then the NUT, and she's now a national officer of the National Education Union. She chairs the union's international committee, and she's very well placed to do that. She's also a long-serving member and an activist in the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which has been one of the most influential campaigns, certainly here and across Europe, and has been absolutely central in organising the demonstrations in London and other cities. And it's attracted, as Ben just said, hundreds of thousands of people. Louise, I'm pleased to say, is a friend of mine, but more importantly for this meeting, she knows and lives the true meaning of solidarity. She's visited Palestine on very many occasions, and as she may say in her own remarks, when in Palestine, the Palestinians don't need our tears. What they need is our solidarity. We need to be active and amplify their voices. Louise, I'm delighted. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Christine, and thank you everyone for coming tonight. I think, this is a vital moment for the Palestinian people that we continue to speak out. Very interesting to hear that Ben went to Pate's Grammar School. I didn't realise that because I come from Chatham, so that was a very informative bit of information for me. So I'll have a little chat with him about that at some point. That's very interesting. But aside from that, yes, I am on the National Executive. I chair our International Committee for the National Education Union. Very proud to be a member of a union that has a very long history of standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And obviously, Christine Blower was a previous General Secretary of the union who led us in much of our work around Palestine. So very pleased to be here with Christine as well. And also very proud to be the Vice Chair of Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which, as Christine has said, has been at the forefront of leading these demonstrations. But actually, the public have shown their voices and have been there with their feet on the floor. At our peak, over 800,000 people on the street, a huge turnout. And I think that reflects the public's opinion, which, as we know, does not reflect what our government is saying, with over 2/3 of the public believing that a permanent ceasefire is something that they would support. Yet our government continues to vote against that and to abstain in votes at the UN, which is an absolute disgrace. I think people haven't really touched much about the current situation, but I'm sort of obsessed with the figures, which is not a good thing, but I do get very obsessed about this. But since the 7th of October, more than 18,000 Palestinians have now been killed. And what I find quite shocking is that 2/3 of those are women and children. So we're constantly being told by our government that this is about self-defense. Well, I don't think killing women and children is something you do in self-defense. The highest proportion actually is children, and nearly 8,000 children currently. I think the outcome will be that it will be many more than that, because there are children and people reported missing who are likely to be trapped under rubble. And I think that the final figures will not be anywhere near what we are currently hearing. And quite shocking to hear of parents writing their children's names on their body parts so that if their building is bombed, they can identify whether their child has been killed in that bomb attack. Something which is horrific to me as a parent, as a teacher. I just cannot imagine how that must feel. Huge amounts of medics, UN staff as well, killed, and journalists actually. So Ben, has just been talking about journalism, but highest death toll, I think, amongst journalists and media workers since reporting of that. And a huge amount of displacement across the Gaza Strip. So around 80% of the population now displaced, living in makeshift camps without any sanitation, without access to any sort of aid because of the low numbers of aid trucks that are being allowed in. So I think prior to the humanitarian pause, as it was called, there was only around 3% of the necessary aid getting into Gaza that was required. I know it did go up slightly during the humanitarian pause, but we're right back down again to very low amounts of aid being allowed in. But aid reporters on the ground reporting that even when aid is allowed in, it's so dangerous to move about within Gaza because of the indiscriminate bombing that it's very difficult to get aid to any places where it is needed. Prior to October the 7th, 500 trucks a day were entering, and that has, it's just a mere fraction of that is going in currently. We know that schools, hospital, housing units have been indiscriminately bombed. My own union, the National Education Union, raised concerns about the attacks on schools where people, internally displaced people, were sheltering and were killed. And if you looked at the images coming out from northern Gaza during the humanitarian pause, it was quite shocking, the indiscriminate destruction of just buildings. I mean, the thought of what will happen once there eventually is a ceasefire is quite terrifying, really. I think outside, you know, obviously Gaza is our priority at the moment, and our key call has to be for a ceasefire. However, I think we have to recognise that it isn't just within Gaza that Palestinians are under attack, and the heightened violence across the West Bank is really concerning for us as well. So 265 Palestinians currently, including 69 children. A huge increase in settler violence and a real feel that people are under huge attack. Blocks of, you know, there was already a huge imposition of security measures across the West Bank for anyone that has been there, and I have. So there are huge checkpoints at regular points, but that has really increased. The general movement around the West Bank is really difficult for Palestinians living there, and really anxiety for them around just going out. Actually, I was talking to an educator who was really concerned about just traveling to school and what might happen to them and their students because of the heightened violence across that area. And also there has been massive increases in violence and killing of Palestinians within 48 within Israel, the 20% Palestinian population that live there, and real fears for them, and also actually anyone that speaks out against what is happening. So, I mean, as I said, I think our immediate call has to continue to be for an immediate and long-lasting ceasefire and for humanitarian aid, which is absolutely vital, with many aid organisations saying that it is critical now. You know, there's real risk of starvation, dehydration, and also illnesses caused by the lack of sanitation. So I think that has to be our immediate call. But I think longer term, we have to remember that this didn't begin on the 7th of October, and other people have referred to that. Palestinians have lived for decades under occupation, and Gaza has lived under a blockade for 17 years. They've faced an oppressive system, dispossession of their land and their rights, and as has been called by a number of organisations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, B'Tselem, an apartheid state where their rights, their legitimate rights, have been denied. And we have a duty, once and when we get a lasting ceasefire, to continue to speak out for justice for the Palestinian people. And as Christine said, you know, when we go, that is the one voice that we hear. They always say to us, you know, we appreciate that you think this is really horrible and you want to cry for us, but we don't need your tears. We need your voices. We need you to go back and to keep speaking out. We've seen a huge growth of people committed to supporting Palestinians since the 7th of October and since the attacks on Gaza. But we have to continue that once we get a ceasefire and make sure that we get the justice and long-term freedom for the Palestinian people that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Louise. I knew you'd be brilliant. I think you can probably give us the date of the next national demonstration.
The next national demonstration will be on Saturday, the 13th of January.
Okay, so make sure that's in your diary. Thank you very much, Louise. Okay, so we move now to our fourth speaker, Jeremy Corbyn, very, very long-serving MP of Islington, the North constituency, and of course former leader of the Labour Party, as well as former chair and current Central Council member of Liberation. Jeremy is internationalist to his core and can be relied upon always to stand in solidarity with oppressed people everywhere. And he has an immensely long and proud history of standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Outside of Parliament, he's the founder of the Peace and Justice Project, which, if you're not associated with it yet, I encourage you to look it up and get involved. Jeremy is also a published poet and a very good comrade. And Jeremy, I'm delighted to give you the floor. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Christine. I've just come from a meeting downstairs, and thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for the very kind words you just said. And having this discussion about Palestine is absolutely crucial, and the PJP, Peace and Justice Project, is obviously working with everyone on promoting people to get to all the rallies and demonstrations that are being held at the moment, and that is having an amazing effect. And the way in which you, Christine, raised the issue, spoken at demonstrations, and lots of others have, has made an incredible difference. We had a question in Parliament today about the vote of Britain at the UN last week, or the non-vote of Britain, and the Minister, Andrew Mitchell, claimed that abstention was the only sensible thing to do. He never explained why it was the only sensible thing to do, but he was very clear it was the only sensible thing to do. And then went on to agree with a Tory backbencher who asked if he would confirm that Britain stood foursquare behind Israel in all its objectives. And then went back on his word about the ceasefire and said, well, humanitarian pauses are better than ceasefires. Well, I don't quite understand the logic behind this. I voted for a ceasefire because that is the only way to protect life in Gaza at the present time. The idea of a humanitarian pause is something horrible and cynical about it, because what it does is says there will be a pause in fighting, so you can bring in some more medicine to tend the wounded, you can bring in some supplies, but we'll resume bombing straight away after that. Now, we just have to get the figures, be realistic about what has actually happened. 1,200 people died on October 7th, and that was awful and was wrong. We then had a few days of not very much happening. We then had this massive mobilization in Israel, and then an instruction for the people in Gaza, in the northern part of Gaza, to move south. The first UN objection came at that point, saying this: you cannot instruct people to leave their homes because you're about to invade. Some did, some didn't. Some tried to stay and some went south. They then harassed them going further south and started the bombardment, and then started bombing civilian targets all down the Gaza Strip. And we now have a situation where even the UN Secretary General says the situation life is unsustainable in the Gaza Strip because of the bombardment that's gone on. And there's over 1 million people, well over 1 million people, now corralled into an area that's less than the size of Heathrow Airport, with not enough food, certainly not enough water, insufficiency of medical supplies, and children dying, people cannot be wounded, cannot be tended, and I'm not even clear what they do with the bodies when they find them as a result of the deaths that are taking place. It's a humanitarian disaster, and we're watching it live on TV, day in, day out. No wonder people get frustrated and very, very angry around the world. And so when the UN has now voted, I think, 6 times on various aspects of bringing about a ceasefire to try and bring about a peace process, the only pause there's been was kept to for some of the days by both parties in the arms part of the conflict. And so it shows that contacts are there. It shows that Qatar can be effective in bringing people together and can be effective in trying to bring about a process for the future. That is now ignored and forgotten, and the US vetoed the demand for a ceasefire, which was backed by an overwhelming majority of the General Assembly of the UN as well as the Security Council. Britain abstained, effectively siding with the USA because there was no need for a second party to bring about a veto, so they didn't use the veto. But I got the feeling it probably would have done had they been required to do so. So the political pressure has to be very heavy upon the government of this country. But in all his replies this afternoon, when various of us, including me, got up and made demands about the ceasefire, Mitchell kept saying, well, this policy is the policy of both front benches in Parliament. Both front benches speak for all of the Parliament. Well, it is the policy of both front benches, and it is a Tory-Labour agreement on not backing an immediate ceasefire, calling only for humanitarian pauses. And that, to me, is something quite disgraceful about it. Two other aspects to this. One is the role of the British armed forces in this. Britain has stationed naval vessels off the coast, is having apparently surveillance flights all over Gaza, which are designed to locate the hostages. I'm not quite sure how they're doing that. And then when pressed, the Defence Secretary said Britain was not a party to the military conflict, but was only there for humanitarian purposes. Well, these flights that are taking place over Gaza, presumably doing surveillance photography and so on, that information must be being passed on to the Israeli army, the Israeli Defense Force, because they are the ones that are tasked with finding the hostages. So it seems to me that Britain is involved. There are many reports of flights going from RAF Akrotiri to Israel. I've asked questions in the House about this. I wrote a substantial letter to the Foreign Secretary on what the actual military arrangements were, and I haven't yet had any substantive reply to that, and I don't suspect I will. When questioned on this, Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, claimed that British arms sales to Israel were actually very small, only 48 million. Well, by terms of expenditure on arms, that probably isn't that great, but it is significant that Britain is still selling arms to Israel even now. And Andrew Mitchell kept hiding behind the arms sales conventions that are meant to be the guidance of British policy. So that is an aspect of it that we've got to push on and explore much further, as well as the need for supporting medical aid for Palestine and all the other groups, Islamic Relief and so on, that are all trying to get aid and support into the Gaza Strip. And two other points I just want to mention, if I may, Christine. One is that you kind of ask yourself, what is the policy of Israel here? And you have to come to the conclusion that by now effectively imprisoning the vast majority of the Gazan population in a very small area around the Rafah crossing, relying on the cooperation between Israel and Egypt to decide whether the crossing is open or not. At the moment, people that can only traverse it are those with foreign residences or foreign passports. If you're a Palestinian, you cannot traverse that crossing unless you have a right of residence somewhere else. And that is proved very difficult, even when, as a constituency MP, we get requests about family reunion of people that are in Gaza at the moment. And then you think, well, what's going to happen next? This devastating humanitarian crisis will lead to something. I suspect it will be enormous moral and other pressure on Egypt to open the crossing, possibly with the connivance of Israel, and the population of Gaza will stream out and go into the Sinai, and a new Gaza Strip will be established in the Sinai, just like it was in 1948 when the Nakba drove out 700,000 people from what is now Israel. And I suspect that will be followed by Israeli occupation of the Gaza Strip. So we're actually looking, I believe, at a huge expansion of Israel's land grab. And then you look at what's happening in the West Bank. I've been in touch with Mick Bowman. He's a lovely guy. He's from Newcastle, and he's walked all the way to Palestine, well, all the way to Turkey, and then flew the last bit to raise the case of the cause of the Palestinian people. Got to Amman and then got into the West Bank around the early part of October, and has been there ever since. And he's now in the South Hebron Hills. And he's monitoring and sending reports in about the number of villages where settlers, with the support of the Israeli Defense Force and provision of 20,000 assault rifles are going from village to village, literally rounding up the entire population and driving them out of the village, and thus claiming the village as a new settlement. Village by village, the West Bank is being depopulated of Palestinians who presumably, for their own safety, will end up going into Jordan. And so there's an expulsion going on there, which gets much less publicity than what's going on the Gaza Strip. And the settlements themselves that are already there house around 600,000 people. And they also are being well supplied with arms and weapons. And I saw a film this morning of a group from one of the Israeli settlements on the West Bank celebrating Hanukkah by going out and stealing all the olives off the trees in the nearby Palestinian village. And when the Palestinian villagers protested about this, just threatened them with guns and other weapons. And so what you actually see is the arrogance of the settlers against the Palestinian population. And the last group, which almost never get mentioned.
I hope this is your last point, Jeremy.
Thank you. The last group that never get mentioned, because I think they must be, is the refugee diaspora. They're in refugee camps in Jordan, in Lebanon, and in Syria. They have limited political rights in any of those countries. They're second-class citizens in some cases, and they've been there, and their descendants, their ancestry rather, have been there since 1948. They need to be included in the whole political process. So all I can say is we've got to be out there in support of the Palestinian people and recognize that a global opinion is very strong in support of Palestine, and that there are people in Israel that also support Palestine, and there are very many Jewish groups around the world that also support Palestine, because they recognize that as a humanitarian and human rights issue, we should support the right of the Palestinian people to be recognized and live in peace in their own land. It's fundamental to everything that liberation believes in. It's fundamental to the decency of the labor movement. And shame, absolute shame on those MPs that couldn't bring themselves to vote for the immediate ceasefire. We'll find ways of bringing that vote back again and see if they can be shamed a second time, this time into doing the right thing. Christian, I've gone on too long. I apologize. Thank you.
You may have gone slightly over time, Jeremy, but it's always a delight to listen to you. Thank you very much. Okay, our fifth and final speaker is Dr. Aqel Taqaz, who is the Secretary of the Palestinian Peace Council, which is an affiliate of the World Peace Council, of which Aqel is the Secretariat member and coordinator of the Middle East region. He is the International Secretary for the Palestinian People's Party, a member organization of the Palestinian Authority. He is a doctor by profession. He's been involved throughout his life in the Palestinian struggle and writes and speaks regularly on matters pertaining to Palestine and the Middle East. He is the former elected mayor of the Khobar district in the West Bank. He's joining us from there. Dr. Taqaz, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for giving me also this opportunity to address this speech to you and to the audience. What we can say today that it is unfortunate that for 66 days, the genocide is continuing without any serious effort to stop this genocide. Israel is attacking Gaza, and there is also another silent war against Palestinians in West Bank. In Gaza, the numbers are growing every hour. The killed Palestinians are more than 18,000. 45,000 injured, 7,000 children to be killed, women to destroy buildings, homes, to destroy ambulances, to kill medical personnel, to kill employees of UN, to destroy schools, mosques, churches, and everything is destroyed in Gaza by air and by artillery. Netanyahu is saying that he is fighting against Hamas, But I think that all the world is seeing that Netanyahu is killing the Palestinian people. He is not fighting against Hamas, because we can see that what is the Israeli occupation forces is doing is to destroy everything in Gaza for one goal. Israel is aiming to push Palestinians to go out of Gaza. It is the main goal of the Zionist regime, and this, especially this fascist government of Israel, as Comrade Ofer said, that in this government of Netanyahu, there is a real fascist elements as Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who are saying that Palestinians in West Bank and in Gaza has only three choices: to accept the occupation, or to go out, or to be killed. And this government is doing the third one, killing as much as more Palestinians to force them to leave their land and their country. In West Bank also, the settlers, armed settlers are attacking Palestinians and Palestinian villages and cities every day. They are killing, with the support of the Israeli army, Palestinians in daily basis. They are sieged the villages, they are blocked them, they are closed all roads between cities, between villages and cities, and West Bank is also is under Israeli attack. I think that all the humanity saw how they killed a guy. After injured him, he was on the ground, and they opened fire and a lot of firing on him, killing him as all the people saw that. The problem is that the goal of Israel is to force Palestinians to go out. Netanyahu's other aim is to escape from his personal accusation inside the Israeli community, as there was before 7th of October a huge demonstrations against him, and they accused him for corruption, and he can go to the jail. The most important thing that we have to say also, that this war against Palestinians is not only Israeli war. It is with the full and participation of United States. We saw that from the first moment Biden came to Israel, other Western leaders came to Israel to show support to Israel. From the first moment, they are supplying Israel with all weapons. And after the 3, 4, 7 days of ceasefire, humanitarian ceasefire, Blinken was there in Israel on Friday, and on Saturday, the second wave of killing and genocide started with the full support of United States. We saw also that the whole humanity voted for ceasefire, and United States in the Security Council voted against the ceasefire. This means that United States, Western countries, NATO are supporting this plan of Israel. Until now, Jordan and Egypt are not willing to accept the Israeli demand to open the borders for Palestinians to be again refugees. We hope that this position will continue. But if, as Comrade Corbyn said, that next position will be, or next step will be, that the pressure on Egypt to open the borders, it means that the Palestinians are before a new wave of Nakba. We believe that this war must end now. And because of that, we believe that the humanity, the international community must work for ceasefire now. Without ceasefire now, we believe, and unfortunately, the situation will continue as it is in the last days and 2 months with a genocide against Palestinians, not only against Hamas, which is a part of the Palestinian people. I don't believe that any logical person can imagine that one part of Palestinian people can be liquidated because they have another political issue or another political position. We believe that this war is against all the Palestinian people. It is not against Hamas or Islamic forces. It is not only against Gaza. It is against Palestine in general. And as we said, in the West Bank, the situation is not so better than in Gaza, but because of the huge destruction and killing in Gaza, the focus is there, and less focus is on West Bank. We believe that European Union also has some responsibility, especially Britain, as from the issue of the history, has responsibility to have an effort for the right of the Palestinians. We can see that for these 2 months, even humanitarian aid cannot enter to Gaza, especially to the north of Gaza. Israel is preventing the people spilling from the north of Gaza to go back. In the days with the ceasefire, people were trying to go back to their destroyed houses, but Israel was preventing them, shooting them, and preventing them to go back. This shows that what is the Israeli aim in this war. We believe that the international community failed during the last not only 50 years of occupation of West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem, during the 75 years from the resolution 181 to force Israel to accept the establishment of the Palestinian state, because we believe that this is the only solution in the Middle East, by establishing a Palestinian state within the borders of June 67, and with East Jerusalem as capital, and the right of refugees to return according to the UN Resolution 194. Because without this, there will be no peace in the Middle East. Israel can destroy Gaza. Israel can kill thousands and thousands of Palestinians, but the Palestinian issue will be there without the solution, without giving the Palestinians their right for self-determination. No peace in the Middle East. And we believe that talking about some kind of peace process, we had a peace, the so-called peace process for 30 years with the United States to manipulate the mediation of the issue. United States didn't want to solve the problem. They were working to manage, or only to manage the problem. And because of that, we believe any solution must be through international conference with the participation of all sides, and with the United Nations, with China, Russia, the United States, Israel, Palestine, and other Arab countries, because there is also an occupied Syrian land and Lebanese land, and because without solving all these issues, Middle East will be in danger. And we can say also that this time there is a huge danger for wider conflict, because if Israel succeed to liquidate the Palestinian issue, Lebanon is in the other step is Lebanon, and if there will be a wider participation from Hezbollah or from Syria or from with United States to come to the Mediterranean with carriers and with submarines, there will be a huge danger for wider conflict, which may lead to a world war. And because of that, we believe that all forces in the world who are believing on peace in the Middle East or in the world peace must have a serious efforts to stop this genocide, to stop this war, and to come to the solution by solving the Palestinian problem. We saw how Israel...
I'm going to ask you to wrap up in just a couple of sentences, please, Dr. Taqaz.
Yeah, we saw that Israel during its life ignoring all the resolutions of United Nations. They don't respect anything. They don't respect any law. And we saw the reaction of Israel when Mr. Guterres said about the situation in Gaza. They attacked him and they demanded his resignation and so that. Because of that, we believe that all of us must work on ceasefire now. Without this, the situation will be more and more dangerous. Thank you very much.
Dr. Aqel, thank you very much indeed. Right, I've just been asked to relay warm greetings from Aqel, the Progressive Party of the Working People in Cyprus, to tonight's meeting. Aqel have recently led major protests against the use of RAF bases on the island to aid and supply Israel's onslaught on Gaza. Comrades, I think what I plan to do, given that we absolutely have to finish at 5 to 7, is this. We have 5 questions. Ben has had to leave us because he had another meeting at 6:30. So we have 4 remaining speakers. I'm going to simply put all the questions and ask any of the panelists who would like to respond to any of the questions to do that in 4 or 5 minutes. So here is the first question. What are the key changes that need to take place from the Israeli and Palestinian sides, as well as the international community, to get a meaningful peace process back on track? I think it's a very long time since any kind of peace process has been on track, but there you are. I'll just leave that for you.
I cannot see no track there.
Exactly. The second question is, the characterization of the Israeli government as fascist is a stark warning to the people of the world, as well as the immediate priority of sustaining and building protest actions against the Israeli occupation and genocide. How can we organize against the growth of fascism in Israel and, as it appears to be growing in other mainstream political parties and states around the world? Question 3 is very short, but requires, an incredible amount of thought and probably much longer answers than we can give at the moment. It is, what is the future of the two-state solution today? Question 4 is, what is the panel's view on the role and responsibility of the Parliamentary Labour Party to bring pressure to bear to secure peace and justice for Palestinians at the current juncture? And then a much more wide-ranging question, number 5. The media has, over the past 24 hours, been speaking about Israel starting a war on Hezbollah in Lebanon after they finished with Gaza. Is there any stomach in Israel for such a devastating and provocative course of action? This could possibly be the start of a regional war, drawing in Iran, and possibly, it says here apocalyptically, the precursor to a third world war. Now, those are all very big and very important questions, and we have literally 15 minutes in which to answer them. So I'm going to ask you each to pick the question where you think you can most appropriately contribute at this stage, and to do it in 3 or 4 minutes so we can finish in a timely fashion. I'll call upon you in the order in which you spoke originally. So Dr. Cassif, if you'd like to start, and I guess you might be best placed to talk about the situation in Israel. But
yes, thank you very much. I'll be as brief as possible. As I said before, the situation within Israel is on a continuous deterioration as far as basic rights, democratic rights are concerned, especially to the 20% Palestinian citizenry, and but also to anyone who is against the hegemony of the occupation and currently of the assault on Gaza. So we do need the international community because we do our best. In the Knesset there are 120 seats. We have 5, and the vast majority of the others. What is the vast majority? The others, including the Labour Party, are totally in support of the assault on Gaza. They don't talk even about ceasefire, not to mention peace process. So we do need the international community support. Without the support of the international community, we have no chance to succeed. And we all know that the only way to prevent those disasters from happening time and time again, to prevent the disaster falling upon the Palestinians and the Israelis, the only way is to end the occupation of 1967. No other way. No other way. And as long as there is no powerful factor in the Israeli politics that is brave enough and blunt enough and honest enough to say that and to put forward a real process towards ending the occupation and achieving a just peace, such disasters will fall upon us again and again. We need your help. And here, of course, I'm lamenting the position of the Labour Party of Britain. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister is not Jeremy. I wish he was. But unfortunately, he's not, and not even even the leadership of the Labour Party goes astray after the manipulations of the Israeli government. And there's one thing, and I'll finish with that because I know time is short. It's very important to emphasize. We all know, and Mr. Corbyn perhaps knows better than all of us, that one of the manipulations that the Israeli government has been pursuing against those who criticize the Israeli governments and criticize the occupation, etc., is to accuse one in anti-Semitism, in anti-Israelism. You cannot even speak. I'm time and time again accused within the Knesset as self-hatred Jew or fifth column or traitor. So they always do that. So one thing that we must, the international community must do, first because it's right to do so, morally speaking, but also because, again, practically speaking, it's more useful. Don't forget to say that ending the occupation and at the moment, total ceasefire and exchanging of prisoners, but in the long run, ending the occupation, an independent Palestinian state besides Israel, those are the interests of the Israelis as well. Obviously of the Palestinians, but also of the Israelis. Those who support the Israeli government do not support Israel and do not support the Israelis, because the main enemy of the Israelis now and the state of Israel is the Israeli government. The Israeli government, and especially Netanyahu, but not only him, are not interested in the well-being of the Israelis. They are interested in their own power. Don't let them to continue with that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cassif. I'm going to come to you, Louise, and hear any remarks that you've got in response to any of those questions.
No problem. Thanks, Christine, and thanks for those questions. I mean, the first question about key changes that need to take place from anywhere really around, getting some sort of peace in the region. I think if you look historically, one of the biggest difficulties is that Palestinian voices are not heard. And you cannot organise or build for a peace process if you do not listen to the people that are oppressed and that have been occupied for decades. So I think for me, any attempt to build any meaningful peace process has to legitimately listen to the Palestinian people's views, not just within Palestine, within the West Bank and Gaza, but also, as has been mentioned, those in the refugee camps that have never been able to return. I'll just briefly refer to the two-state solution, which comes up quite a lot, and I know it's Labour Party policy. But I mean, I just speak as someone who has been to Palestine a lot and has watched more and more of the land being stolen. You only have to look at the maps that Palestine Solidarity Campaign and other organisations produce that show how disparate the land is, how small the areas are that Palestinians live in, that make it such a difficult thing to do. But ultimately, for me and for Palestine Solidarity Campaign, it's not for us to determine what the answer or the solution is for the Palestinian people. It's for the Palestinian people to judge and to say what they see as being a resolution to their decades and decades of occupation. And the final thing I'll say around the Labour Party is, I have been a Labour Party member for the majority of my life. I've resigned twice now. The first time was around the Iraq War, and now again over the position on Palestine, because I could not remain a member of a party that was not going to support unequivocally a ceasefire and stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I think until, it's already been referred to, and I spoke to Jeremy about this on Saturday, we would be in a very different position if Jeremy was the leader of the Labour Party, but he is not, unfortunately. But I think we have a duty as people here in the UK to put pressure on our politicians who are elected to represent us. And we know that 2/3 of the population in the UK support a ceasefire. We have a duty to pressure those politicians to act on our behalf, and to ensure that there is a lasting ceasefire to stop what is happening now, but actually to go further than that and to ensure that there is justice and peace for the Palestinian people long term, and a just and fair peace process.
Louise, thank you very much. I'm going to come to you now, Jeremy, see if you can just do 3 minutes for me.
Thank you very much, Christine, and fascinating answers from my colleagues on the panel that I've heard so far. And Otter, thank you so much for what you said and the way you put it. And Louise, of course, we had that discussion on Saturday. The role of the Parliamentary Labour Party in this has been absolutely appalling in every way. Quite understandably, people were shocked and appalled what happened at the beginning of October. That is a human response, and that is a correct human response. And then they seem to have lost all critical abilities after that. And the leader of the party declared full support for Israel in all that it did. And when the question of the ceasefire came up, absolutely refused to endorse the call for a ceasefire. And as I said in my early contribution, the Minister, Andrew Mitchell, who spoke in the House today, continually said, this is the position of both front benches in Parliament. And that's correct, it is. And it seems to me that the whole history of most of the leaders of the Labour Party has been one of complete support for Israel in all that it does. That's not to say that there is not a significant grouping of people in the Labour Party that support the rights of Palestinian people and have been honourably very active in the cause for a very long time, and also worked with many left groups in Israel in pursuing that cause over the years. But it seems to me that we're just in a complete change now. The Netanyahu government, having set about attacking the judiciary in Israel, has gone on the most brutal militarist regime ever in Gaza, and authorizing the most brutal activities against Palestinian people on the West Bank. It seems to me is a fundamental change here. And the Biden administration is underwriting all of this, protecting all of this, and indeed promoting all of this, as is Britain. And the role of the Labour Party seems to be to essentially support the Biden administration, the role of the Labour Party leadership, that is, from Starmer and David Lammy and what they've said about this. Is it going to change? Well, the anger I'm meeting amongst people who are members of the Labour Party about this, and the enormous turnout and demonstrations in Britain, we had the equivalent of 10 cup final crowds on one march in London when we went down to the US Embassy that day, and there are meetings all over the country. I just did one on the street in Liverpool yesterday outside the cathedral. Very big rally it was too. Now, where does all this lead to, and what changes there have to be? It's not, as I agree with Louise, it's not for us to decide what tactics the Palestinian people should follow. But what I'd hope is that a sense of unity develops between all Palestinian people, including the refugees, as to the way forward. And also a challenge to the Abraham Accords, which have been so willingly signed by a number of Middle Eastern governments, with apparently very little concern as to what that means for the Palestinian people and whether it means they're being sidelined and ignored in all of this. And I hope that the popular understanding in Egypt, in UAE, in Saudi Arabia and other places will be the need for solidarity with the Palestinian people. Otherwise, we are in for a very bad future indeed. It's a time when we're powerless to some extent, but we're very powerful in another way, in that we can mobilize large numbers of people on the streets all over the world. And I tell you what, I think public opinion is changing very rapidly when they're just seeing on live television the brutal destruction of people's lives and the starvation of Palestinian people and their death by lack of care, lack of support, and the war crimes that have been committed all around them. That is simply wrong. And the last thing I'd say, Christine, as I said at the end of my speech on Saturday, this is perhaps a time where liberation's long history of international activity is important. This isn't the only war going on. It's not the only war fueled by the arms trade. There's Yemen, there's Congo, there's so many other conflicts, and Sudan, all around the world, fueled by the arms trade. Surely to goodness, we need a change in the agenda and a change in the terms of debate. Maybe that's the only good thing that will come out of the horror of the past 2 months.
Jeremy, thank you very much. Dr. Taqaz, I'm going to ask you if you think you can address yourself to the question about the possibility of a war on Hezbollah in Lebanon, and drawing in Iran and the horrors that would bring in its train. But if you don't want to answer that, answer something else.
Yeah, I would like first to say about the two-state solution and the future of the two-state solution. We believe that this is only viable solution in the Middle East. Any other solution is disaster for all, because we have now one state solution which is under occupation, and it is an apartheid and fascist regime in Israel controlling all the region of Palestine. And because of that, we believe if there will be a dramatic change and the other side will win, it will be also disaster for the Middle East, because it will be against Israeli population and Israeli citizens. And because of that, we believe the only viable solution is the two-state solution, while Israel is during the last 30 years systematically working to kill this solution. They were killing this solution all these years. Second, I think that the Palestinian side from 1988 accepted the two-state solution. The problem is Israel and United States. United States is talking about the two-state solution, but not doing anything for the implementation of this solution. They are only talking and they are lying. This is the issue. And because of that, Israel is not accepting the two-state solution. About the possibility of wider war in the Middle East, it is a serious danger, because until now, as Gaza is resisting and Israel is not able to achieve goals, Hezbollah is there with a limited participation in the war. But if there will be, as the leaders of Hezbollah said, that it is not possible for Gaza to lose the war, if it will be dangerous for Gaza and to lose the war, there will be a wider war. And with the presence of the US forces in the Middle East, there will be a danger for wider, not only with Hezbollah or with Yemen or with Iraq or with Syria, it will be because, as you know, American forces are there, Russian forces in Syria are there, and Iran is there, and wider, and maybe world war will be there. Unfortunately, we have all to work to prevent this. And because of that, I believe that the continuation of the solidarity with Palestinian people, demanding the ceasefire now, will prevent the wider war in the Middle East. Thank you very much.
Dr. Taqaz, thank you very much indeed. We've come to the end of our allotted time for the meeting. At its high point, I think we had 87 participants, possibly a few more. Thank you very much to all of those of you who listened, and I thank on behalf of them all of our speakers who joined us this evening and gave us some really interesting presentations. Let me say that we didn't even, I think, notwithstanding the efforts of our really interesting panelists, didn't begin to touch the surface really of those very deep and important questions. So clearly Liberation may need to put on another meeting sometime soon, in particular about the rise of fascism and the extreme right all over the place. And indeed to discuss further in depth the question of what is the future of a peace process and what that could conceivably look like. It seems a very distant prospect at the moment, but we have to hope, but more important, we have to work and struggle for the fact that we can eventually see a peace process. Our friends and comrades in Palestine are relying on us for the solidarity to ensure that we are moving forward with that agenda. So my closing remarks are just, again, to thank everybody and to say that there is a lot more about the work of Liberation to be found at www.liberation.org.co.uk. We have some extremely interesting meetings, and I invite you all to come and join us in another meeting again soon. And with that, and in good order, I close the meeting. Solidarity, comrades, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everybody. Lovely to see you all.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.